Today on Locked On Red Wings, 3 reasons why the Detroit Red Wings could be better next season.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. Scotty is also the host over at Locked On Tigers. I implore everyone here on Locked On Red Wings to go give his post-trade deadline reactional listen. I'm sure, Scotty, I haven't had the opportunity myself yet to listen, but we riffed a little bit before we hopped on here. I'm sure you had a lot to say about, the 4 players they ended up trading away over the course of the last week, 3 of which were in the last hour of the deadline?
Correct. Yeah, it was it was a doozy for sure. Very, very busy day for yours truly, but a lot to discuss for sure.
Absolutely. And he's also a freelance journalist over at the Detroit News. So once you get done listening to us and then get done listening to him, go read his stuff as well. We're giving you a lot of homework to do to support us as your hosts because you love us, right? Anyways, I'm going to stop rambling now. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Also want to thank you guys for making Locked On Red Wings every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Scotty, this is kind of just, we are officially kind of turning the corner here in the offseason, getting into player and season preview mode. Yesterday, we talked about the divisional outlook and where we felt the division was and how it fell, any possible risers and fallers. We didn't spend a lot of time on the Red Wings. One, because we are Locked On Red Wings. We talk about the Red Wings literally every single episode. And 2, the next 2 episodes are going to be 3 reasons why the Detroit Red Wings are going to get better and 3 reasons why they could be worse. We do this every offseason and talk about the changes they made and how this could potentially make them a better hockey team and potentially make them a worse hockey team. But we're going to start, as we usually do, with 3 reasons why the Red Wings could be better next season. And tomorrow we'll do the 3 reasons why they could be worse. Scotty, which of the 3 reasons why we feel they could be better next year do you want to begin with?
I think I want to start with one of the kind of obvious ones that you and I specifically have been talking about for a really long time, and that's the youth movement, I guess. One of the reasons, and honestly, this might be one that's on both lists, right? Like if you're looking at 3 reasons as to why the Wings could take a step forward, you can talk about the youth and say there's going to be a lot of young players, especially in that kind of bottom 6 and in the bottom 4 defensively, right? There's going to be a lot of youth in those spots, certainly more than there was last year. We talk about rookies that have a chance of debuting and et cetera, et cetera. If they perform really well, then they could absolutely be a reason as to why there's a step forward. And I think that we talk a lot about the depth scoring specifically that walked out the door. But if better players are filling those roles, better all-around players, in these young guys that are going to get an opportunity, then that is going to be a really important piece for the Wings next season. It's kind of a lottery ticket, right? It could absolutely go the other way again. It could be on our show whenever we do it later this week about 3 reasons as to why they could take a step back. It could be on that list too, right? Rookies are rookies. And even if it's not just young players are young players, they're volatile and have high ceilings, but also come with low floors, and you don't really know what consistency to expect out of them. So kind of a wide range of possibilities there. But if they are to take a step forward, they are going to need these young players to perform well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go ahead and just flat out say, this is definitely going to be on our 3 reasons why they could be worse as well, because this is, as you put, the biggest variable for the season this year is whether or not these guys immediately have an impact. And one player I am the most confident is going to come in and have an immediate positive impact is, of course, Simon Edvinsson, who, technically he's no longer technically a rookie or at least eligible for the Calder Trophy because of the fact that he played 25 combined NHL games. Also, at the same time, 6 or more in back-to-back seasons. Both of those disqualify him from the Calder. He's still functionally a rookie, right? 16 games last year, the bulk of which came as a stint at the end of the season after Wallman got hurt and then was a scratch for the rest of the year. I think he's going to come in. He's going to come in stronger this season, and he's going to have a full training camp to really help learn the system. Granted, it's really a good thing that Grand Rapids is also running a similar system down there at the AHL level as well. But I have full confidence that Simon Edvinsson is going to come in and immediately make that second pair better. And as the season goes on, and if he's capable of proving that he is capable of taking on more responsibility, maybe helping to take more of the defensive zone workload away from Seider, freeing him up to have more offensive zone opportunities against softer competition. And because we talked about it on end, Seider had the most extreme usage of any defenseman in the NHL last year, and the only person who was second behind that was his partner for the bulk of the season, Jake Wallman, who is, again, now a San Jose Shark, but the point still remains. So anything on the defensive side of the puck that can make the defensive core better will only serve to help develop Seider as well. And we've talked about this a lot with, back when we were doing free agency and players to bring in. We talked a lot about Matt Roy and how much we love the idea of bringing him in because he could help serve the same role, take on more defensive zone responsibility so that Seider doesn't have to be on an island when it comes to deployment in the NHL. So that's just one player. Of course, you also have Albert Johansson, who's more than likely going to make the NHL roster because he's no longer waiver exempt. So he would have to go through waivers to get sent down after training camp, and I just don't see that happening. I don't know what his impact's going to be, but best case scenario, he solidifies himself in that bottom pair. He's a guy who can play both left and right side, is a natural left side defenseman as well. And don't sleep on his ability, his transition game either. He's not just a defensive zone defenseman. He's pretty good in transition, and he was one of the most capable defensemen. Actually, I would go out on a limb and say he was the second most capable defenseman on Grand Rapids last year behind Simon Edvinsson. He was just kind of overshadowed. I don't think their ceilings are the same, but he's a very capable player too. And then, of course, we have Jonathan Berggren, who is the same situation as Albert Johansson, going to be waiver exempt, still needs a new contract, but it's on its way. I mean, we've seen it. Like, we know what his upside is, and I think he'll get deployed in a pretty sheltered role, kind of like a Daniel Sprong-esque role. But if he thrives and he feasts in that role, he could provide a lot of goals for both power play unit 2 is where I would project him to be, and a scoring punch to the bottom 6, especially after a lot of other depth scoring. Again, Daniel Sprong, Robbie Fabry, walked out the door or were traded in the offseason. So there's a pathway here. And that's just the guys who we think are guaranteed roster spots. Like, let's say Marco Kasper, Nate Danielson, or Carter Mazur really impress in training camp. And, you and I both believe Carter Mazur should be on this team next year. We just don't know if there's going to be a roster spot available for it. If either of those guys makes the roster, the impact that the youth could have could go through the roof. But again, that is a huge variable because youth also has that massive ability to make your team take a step back, not because they're bad, but because your rookie season's often a developmental year too.
Yes.
I think I hit all the points there, right?
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered everything there.
Can you tell we've talked about these topics lots of times before? Scott, do you have anything else to add on the youth? I know I just went off on a tangent there, buddy.
No, you're good. I don't think so. I think it's just we will talk about whether they will or won't as we get closer. We'll do player profiles throughout the month of August, right? We'll kind of break down more in depth the individual players. But, when you're looking at reasons as to why, right? Like, that's what this is, 3 reasons they could be better. Well, you can even change the wording a little bit. If you're doing reasons, things that need to happen for the Wings to be better, the youth playing well is going to have to be one. They will not take a step forward if the youth that's going to be on this roster doesn't perform pretty darn well.
Yeah, I think that I would agree with you wholeheartedly on that one. You obviously there's that balance of veteran leadership and youth you need, but you need the youth especially because the youth is the future of this team to be able to make that leap if you want to have a chance to contend. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will move on to the second reason why the Detroit Red Wings could be better next offseason. So stay tuned to segment 2 of Locked On Red Wings. Got to talk to you guys today about Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. And prices on the Game Time app actually go down closer it gets the first pitch. And good news, if you're a Tigers fan, Tarek Skubal is still a Detroit Tiger. The AL Cy Young favorite is still in the D, so there's still a good reason, at least once a week, to go down to Comerica Park and check out the Tigers. And if you do, use Game Time. They have last-minute deals that save you up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. And you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event using those flash deals. And on top of last-minute deals and flash deals, there's also zone deals that allow you to choose the section, and Game Time will choose the seat to save you even more money. And Game Time doesn't, sneak in fees at the end. You can toggle the all-in pricing feature in the settings, and it shows you all the fees up front so you know exactly what you're spending when you go to buy the tickets. And that Game Time guarantee will credit you 110% of the difference if you find the same tickets somewhere else for less. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. There you go. I was wondering if you're going to join us.
I couldn't find the button, dude. Had me in a blender there.
That's great. Scotty, what is the second reason why the Detroit Red Wings could be a better team in the 2024-2025 season?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have 2 points left. I guess I'll go with another one that we've talked about quite a lot. But again, like the angle of this conversation is different than we've discussed before. And that's why I think it's still an important conversation to have, right? Like we've talked about the goaltending and defense a lot on their own. We talked about the additions that they've made to help both of those things. One of the biggest areas of weakness of the Wings last year, if you want to be super general, like over general about it, is just straight up goal prevention, right? Like we continuously talked about how when the Wings were really hot, they were kind of just outscoring their problems. And they weren't crushing teams 5-on-5 a lot of the time, and they were giving up a decent amount of goals, and they didn't have fantastic goalie play throughout, again, outside of the Lion heater, throughout a large chunk of the season. So I think another area in which, something that the Wings need to have happen if they are going to take a step in the right direction and take another step forward, that is going to be just straight up what they did this summer to address their defense and just preventing goals as a whole, which again is a super overgeneralization, and I realize that. But that I'm kind of trying to clump defense and goaltending all into one kind of overarching theme here. Obviously, they addressed a lot of not really a ton on the blue line, I guess, to be honest, outside of just the young players they're going to slide in there. But they definitely addressed kind of the defensive play of the forward core, and then they addressed goaltending as well. So those two things combined if the Wings are going to take a step forward, need to equate to significantly, honestly, better defensive play than the Wings got last year, especially when you add on the amount of goals that walked out the door on top of that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find it here as we talk. The Red Wings had an above average shooting percentage of the team of teams in the NHL. Like they were scoring a lot and getting lucky a lot, and especially when they were hot. And we talked about that when they were hot, right? That a lot of what they were doing was just frankly unsustainable, but we were going to ride the wave as long as it happened. And when they crashed, when Larkin got hurt again, and when the flu ravaged the locker room, everything burned down to the ground, and they came back down to earth. Probably, I mean, honestly, they're not even coming back down to earth. They were playing worse hockey in an unsustainable sense as well. And so if this team really wants to, be a better hockey team, they kind of similar to, as you were saying with the youth, not only does will the youth lead the team to be better? If the team's going to be better, it almost has to. And the same could be said about the defensive side of the puck. I mean, Yzerman said as much, and I've said this 1,000 times. I've quoted it 1,000 times. Yzerman has said that during the end of season availability. The team has to be a defensive team. But this is one area where I actually have the most confidence in out of any of the three reasons. Like where the youth is like, it's a big variable. The vets, which we'll talk about in segment 3, is another like kind of huge variable, right? Like the vets making up for the lost offense. It's also with the defense, I feel like the changes that they made, even if it was marginal, like we've said, this team is a better defensive team. And I think with a better goaltender in Cam Talbot, which granted, he played on a really good LA Kings team that faced the 4th fewest shots in the NHL, and he kind of fell apart down the stretch. I think Cam Talbot's still an upgrade over the goaltending that they have right now because Line's very streaky. Husso, we haven't seen good hockey from, and granted, last year was kind of a wash because of all the injuries. We haven't seen good hockey from Husso since the start of his first season here. Talbot, I think, is an upgrade. I think a full season of Simon Edvinsson and Albert Johansson, as we just talked about, is an upgrade. You know, it sucks losing Jake Wallman, but Sherratt and Seider, in my eyes, proved more capable in that stretch at the end of the season than Seider and Wallman were. I would have still preferred to move, Hull or Mata over Jake Wallman, but it is what it is at this point. And that's just talking about the back end of the ice. The team got better in a pretty significant sense, and that's not even talking about Gustafsson, who's, less offense than Gostisbehere, but not as much of nearly as much of a liability in the back end either. But the defense offensively got better with the acquisition of Tyler Mott, that's his role as a shutdown defensive forward, PK specialist. Andrew Kopp last year, Christian Fischer, Michael Rasmussen, and you brought Christian Fischer back. We already know that's a good shutdown line. Joe Veleno's a good two-way center. So, they brought in players in the reinforce the bottom 6 as a more defensive-minded bottom 6. And yes, you're still overpaying Andrew Kopp too much to be a shutdown forward. But that bottom 6 is going to be more defensive-minded. And again, if Casper can make the team, if Carter Mazur can make the team, that only serves to add to that role. The defensive core and the goaltending is going to be better, at least by player personnel-wise, at keeping pucks out of the back of the net. It all has to come together still, and that's on Derek Lalonde to make sure that everyone gets on board to the system. And it's going to be a really important year for Derek Lalonde as head coach of the Detroit Red Wings. I really think that the hot seat, so to speak, is going to turn up significantly if this team gets off to a really rocky start. But I think that with the player personnel that they have, this is without a doubt a better defensive team, and I think that can help to close the gap on some of the issues they had last year, as you were alluding to with their piss-poor possession metrics and just overall goals they were allowing in down the stretch. At a very bare minimum, even if Cam Talbot isn't and not that I believe he's the savior, but I do think he's an upgrade for this tandem and adds much needed, competition. It's not James Reimer, who will let in a puck from the blue line out of the blue once per game. And I don't mean that as flack against James Reimer, but it was just reality. It felt like every game that was happening, and it was happening to Husso too. So I think that there's this team, even at a bare minimum of being marginally better, will help to close the gap, and at least in that regard, will have been an improvement and will help, in my opinion, lead to an overall improvement if the other two factors we talk about in this episode,
Yeah. I think for me, it's just a matter of how much, though. I have no doubt the defense will be better this year, but if it's
hard not to be.
Right. That's my point. It's it's going to be really hard to be worse. So I agree with you. I have no question about whether it will be better or worse. If it's not better, then something has gone catastrophically wrong. I fully expect it to be better. It's just a matter of if it's going to be better enough. I think that's my biggest question is how much better will it be? How much, better will it be? I said that right. And, been talking a lot today. I don't even know if words are words anymore. But it's just that is really the biggest question to me is how much better, A, will it actually be, and B, how much better does it need to be to make this difference that we're talking about in the context of this episode to improve the team overall?
Yeah, and our initial free agency reaction prior to the Vladimir Tarasenko signing was exactly as you just put it. This is better, but is it better enough? And I think that still rings true because you can absolutely
Was that
turn.
the Lost episode?
It might have been. It might have been the lost episode.
It
We
might
did
have
an
been,
episode
dude. I
right
don't
after.
remember.
Lost episode. I never posted that clip either of me freaking out how at the very end they signed Tarasenko. I still have that
a lot
though.
of bleeps into that.
Yeah. But you could take all the positive things that I just said and flip it right on its head, right? Like, yes, Ben Sherratt and Moritz Seider were better pair than Woolman and Seider in my eyes, but is that still like a good enough number one pair? I don't think so. I don't think Sherratt should be a number one pair defenseman. Ideally, eventually Simon Edvinsson takes that role, but I don't think he can do that in year number one. It would be impressive if he could. Jeff Petry's still not a second pair defenseman, a number two right side defenseman in my eyes, even though Simon Edvinsson makes that pair immediately better. And then what the heck are you doing with that bottom pair? Like it's Olli Mata, Albert Johansson, Justin Holl, and Eric Gustafsson. Like figure it out. So like, yes, it's better, but as you put, you could easily flip it around.
Right. The defense, I mean, we'll talk about it a lot more when we start doing player previews and profiles, whatever we're going to call them. But even like the Edvinsson thing, if he's your second best defenseman, there's almost an argument to keep him down in the second pair and not have him move up the top because your defense is that thin. If you did that, you'd have a really good pairing, and then you'd have two not very good pairings, and your second pair would be brutal. So
we've done the Sherratt Petry experiment.
Right. Yeah. Like it's kind of similar to what happened with Bertuzzi back in the day. It was like he was playing well, but they moved him down to the second line so that they could kind of spread out the scoring a little bit more and not just have one really good line. They might find themselves in that situation again because of the lack of depth currently on the blue line in terms of higher end depth. They have plenty of bodies, is my point, but it's not all NHL caliber top four level players. That's all.
I agree with your point there, but I just want to point out that Guelph line of Fabry, Bertuzzi, and was it Pius Suter was actually kind of electric for a little bit there.
No, it worked. Yeah, I wasn't saying it didn't work. It did. That's my point. Is it did work, and that's why they did it was to try to spread out the production a little bit.
I'm just reminiscing on the. Actually, low key, like I
storm line, baby.
Completely tangent, not related, and I'll be very brief. I wish they had kept Pius Suter, and I thought that the moment they let him walk away last offseason.
We talked about it on the show. There's an episode somewhere out there of you and I both saying we wanted to re-sign Pius Suter.
Like, even if it was a third or fourth line center, he was such a good defensive center. Yeah. And, like, the dude played second line center for the Detroit Red Wings. He was out of his depth, but he played with – I have such a soft spot for Pius Suter. Just want another one of the dogs.
Absolutely.
Did we say it at the same time? Yeah. Let's go to another quick break. When we return, we'll come back with the third reason why the Detroit Red Wings could be better next season. I already kind of spoiled it here in segment 2. It has to do with the veterans stepping up to help fill in lost scoring. So stay tuned for that. Segment 3 of Locked On Red Wings. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Yeah, so the third reason why the Detroit Red Wings could be a better team is that the veterans, both new and old to the Detroit Red Wings, come in and fill in the gaps offensively that the Red Wings let walk or traded away this season. We've talked about losing David Perron, who we both agreed it was probably time to move on. He was slowing down, but he's still, a 20-goal type player, at least on the Detroit Red Wings. You lost Daniel Sprong, who in the bottom 6 is a one-trick pony, but dang, can he score goals. Robbie Fabry, who's good for between 13 and 18 goals. Jake Wallman, who's good for over 10 goals. And obviously Gostisbehere, who had 57 total points this year. A lot of goals walked out of the locker room this year. And one of the big things we were worried about in the lost episode is whether or not they get better enough defensively to close the gap on the goals lost. But Scotty, I actually think that there is a world where the players that they brought in, and Vladimir Tarasenko, that acquisition helps a lot with this argument, could then help make up for all those goals that they lost.
Right. And that's going to be, I think, kind of the million-dollar question of this season is, are they going to be able to maintain or at least be even in the same the same stratosphere, even the same general conversation as when it comes to goal scoring as they were last year? As you said, a lot of depth scoring walked out the door. And this is kind of like all encompassing, right? Like this is going to have to do with the youth. You're going to need some production from some of the younger guys down in the lineup, some of those depth players. But you also like, does Berger count as youth anymore? Like,
Yeah,
you know,
he's
whatever.
young.
Like, right. He's young. He's youngish. Like,
But 23 is still young. I'll give him that. He's not a rookie or a prospect, but he's still young.
Yeah, everything's relative. So like it's one of those things where like you're going to need goal production from you know, people in the bottom six, and a lot of those, you know, the production you got from your bottom six walked out the door, like I said. So that has to do with the youth, that has to do with the players they brought in, that has to do with, I think for me, and this is something we talked about off air earlier today, was like I think the biggest part of this conversation is Cat. Right? Like this is a guy that when we brought him in, it was, can he push 40? Right? We finally got a 30 goal scorer. Can he even push 40? And last year, he didn't even really come super close. We weren't like, oh, he's on 30 goal watch there at the very end of the season. Like, I think that is a huge one. Like, I think that could be honestly the biggest key. And I'm not trying to put the whole season on one dude's shoulders. That's not my intention. That's not what I'm saying either. But I think in this category specifically, when you're looking for how are they going to make up goals that walked out the door, Cat is going to have to be probably the biggest piece of that puzzle.
Yeah, and without a doubt, I think that he's very capable of it. I mean, we saw it last year. I mean, no player on the ice looked more snake-bitten than he did. I mean, he hustled. He did everything right. He even massively improved his two-way game and his playmaking game. Obviously, I think a big part of his increase in career high in assists was the fact that he was playing again. At times in the season, the lines were always constantly being shuffled, but at times with Patrick Kane and, you know, Lucas Raymond and Alex DeBrincat are very good for that as well. But, I mean, like, I agree with you that if he can get back to 35 goals, I'm not even asking for 40. You know, go from 27 back to 35. You know, stop shooting it right into the pad. Stop hitting the post, right? Like, just finish on those opportunities. Like Yzerman said, like, turn those expected goals back into goals. Because it felt like every single game, especially down the stretch when the team needed him most, he was putting himself into positions to succeed, and just that puck was not getting to the back of the net. I remember the one play, I can't remember what team it was, but he did everything right. It might have been Dallas, and like dangled Ottinger or whoever it was, and then had the open net and still managed to hit the post. Yeah. Like, and obviously I'm not trying to make excuses for him. Like, it's still on him to do that. But I do think he has it in him. And then beyond that as well, like, obviously with DeBrincat being number one, but like, we're going to have a full season of Patrick Kane now. And if Patrick Kane is as healthy as he looked for us, but he has a full season of actual NHL training camp and season, you know, here we go, prorate his 20 goals he scored last year in 50 games. That's a 34 goal pace for him? I have 33 goal pace for Patrick Kane. An extra 13 goals from him would be huge. And yes, I know he's also another year older, so you got to take that into account. That's no guarantee. And that's why, just like with youth, there's like a huge variable here. Dylan Larkin, if he would have, I think he was on a 39 goal pace had he played all 82 games. He had set a new career high in goals again for the third straight year. And this year, he played the fewest amount of games, I think, out of the last 3 years. He scored 33 and 68. Like, I think if he had been able to stay healthy, he could have hit 40. Yeah, the last 3 years, it was 68, 80, and 71, but his goal totals have gone up. Despite that, it's despite the fact that this year he played the fewest games out of that 3-year span. So I think there's still more goals out of Dylan Larkin just on an availability side of things. And then who knows how much more Lucas Raymond's going to grow, right? Like, he had broke onto the scene for 70-plus points and 30-plus goals. We didn't expect that. We were thinking like in the 60s as a high. And when nobody else was providing in the month of April, when the team was trying to survive, you could not stop Lucas Raymond. So, like, there's a lot, and that's just from the guys that are here. Tarasenko provided 20-plus goals last year. I expect him to be able to do that again. He's still a lethal shooter, even though he lacks defensively. Erik Gustafsson's going to get you around, close to 10 goals, probably closer to 8. Simon Edvinson's going to pot a few. I don't expect a lot of offense out of Simon Edvinson in his first full season, but I think he can give you maybe close to 5 in a full NHL season. And like, it's just, I think that there is a route here where the new youth that you brought in, and not the new youth, the new blood that you brought in, and the returning blood under a full season and maybe not such bad puck luck can really help replicate the goals that walked out the door. But then the big question, the big problem with that is that's a lot of coulds and ifs, and can't guarantee any of it.
Right. Well, that's the whole premise of the episode is we can just end the show, right? Like that's the whole point of this show, is talking about the ifs and coulds that need to happen for the Wings to take a step forward, what needs to happen if they could, right? And I think the interesting thing, and I know we got to get out of here, but like, I think the interesting thing about the players that you mentioned there was that's a lot in the top 6, right? Like we're talking about Larkin, we're talking about Raymond, we're talking about Tarasenko, we're talking about Kat, and we're talking about Kane. Like that's almost entirely your top 6. That's 5 of your top 6 right there. And last year, a lot of the goals came from depth scoring. And obviously you had your top end players that led the way, you know, like you said, Larkin, career high in goals and whatnot, and Raymond, et cetera. I don't have to repeat you, but I think it's interesting that we are now in a position where, okay, you got better defensively, and now to replace the goals that walked out the door, it's Tarasenko and then just natural improvement from the players you already have. And I think that it could work, but it also could super not work. And I think that is why it is a part of this episode and why we're kind of ending on it. It's probably the biggest question mark going into the season.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I mean, like you said, we're talking about hypotheticals that could, and I didn't even mention Jonathan Berggren as part of like that blood that helps, because I think he's good for probably about 15 goals from the depth role as well. I see a path, and that's the thing. Like we talk about with this team and why this part of the rebuild is so hard, because I do see a path for this team to take a step forward, but just as realistically, I see a path for this team to take a step back. And linear is not always progress isn't always linear, rather. So, like, by no means does, if they take a small step back, if they were to fall apart like the Senators or the Sabres did this year, I'd be a lot more worried. But if they were to take a few steps, a small step back and a few points backwards, I wouldn't be sounding the alarm. I'd be bummed because I want to make the playoffs, and I'd start like really heavily be like, okay, like nudge, nudge, let's get a move on.
Right.
But I'm not panicking if that happens, because it's just as realistic that a lot of the things we talked about could go the exact other way. And I would expect at least one of these things that we already talked about to be on our list tomorrow when we talk about the 3 reasons why they could be worse.
Right. Absolutely.
So, Scotty, you have any final thoughts, brother?
I don't think so, man. We ball.
We do ball. We'll be back with a new episode on Friday, because we're down to 3 episodes a week now. So stay tuned for 3 reasons why.
Now until what, September?
September 16th, I think, is the official date of our return.
We're back to 5, but
right
that's
before
part of the off season, so we're coming at you 3 days a week here.
Hell yeah, brother. So stay tuned for that. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.